Welcome into Moments That Mattered. There might only be a few rounds left of this Hungry Jacks NBL season, but there are plenty of games, especially in January, and I don't think we're any closer to figuring out who's going to be winning this championship. I'm Pete Hooley, back in the seat here to cover for Jack Heverin, and as always, Derek Rucker, the great man, joining us on Moments That Mattered. Ruck, I alluded to it off the top. The parity of this league, everyone keeps beating everyone, and I feel like we sit here with just a few rounds to go. I don't know who's going to be winning this championship.
I agree with you. And right now, it's really hard to determine in the smaller time frame who's actually performing well, who's performing at a level that gives you confidence that they are going to be a legitimate championship contender. And the surprising thing right now is that Melbourne United are teetering. And this is a team who we give so much latitude towards because of their championship pedigree. But Pete, I'm starting to get concerned.
Well, we'll talk about Melbourne United because they have lost 5 of their last 6. But I mentioned off the top the parity. Now, we had the bottom place team, the Cairns Taipans, go into Illawarra, who were trying to bounce back, and they won that game. And then you've got the Adelaide 36ers, albeit probably playing better than a team that's outside the 6. They took care of business against Sydney and Melbourne United. So the beauty of this NBL season, probably more so than a lot that we've seen in the past, is anybody can beat anybody, and this is going to have a big outcome in how the ladder is by the end of the year.
Well, the Cairns Taipans absolutely blew everybody's multi up over that last round. There's no way you could have even taken them plus the points, seeing how Illawarra were coming off of a disappointing loss. But if you look at Adelaide, I like what Adelaide's doing, but yet I don't have a lot of confidence in them simply because they haven't shown the defensive fight on the road that I think is required to be a really good team. They've got plenty of talent. They've got scoring potential. We know all of that. I think that's the final box that needs to be ticked. Sydney are playing winning basketball without looking good. They just figure out a way to manufacture victories. But who else is really giving you confidence? Maybe Perth. I'm not sure about the strength of their schedule recently. So much is up in the air, but I think the team that I'm starting to like and enjoy the way they're playing basketball, and I think is starting to play a good brand of winning basketball, it's Southeast Melbourne.
Well, let's start there with Southeast Melbourne then, because went down, they got a big win. We know we've seen the struggles early in the season, but now they're doing it on the back of the defensive outfit. And we said this a few weeks ago on Moments That Mattered, and we alluded to the offensive firepower since the FIBA break. But having said that, and what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, are you now more on the side of the defenses are going to have a say to win this championship, which means that Southeast Melbourne Phoenix may have a say in how that turns out?
The traditional stance of you have to be in the top 4 to win an NBL championship. And Southeast Melbourne is interesting, right, Pete? Because you probably would agree with me that they outplayed Sydney in that game and actually threw that game away. Sydney were really good in the fourth quarter. You must be wary of that. But Southeast Melbourne going into that fourth quarter, being up 13, that's a game that they must have been sick about losing. However, the game that everyone predicted that they would probably lose down in Tasmania, they win convincingly. So I think that win yesterday kind of makes up for the disappointment of the Sydney loss. They come out of that 3-game road trip, 2 wins and 1 loss. And the 1 loss, you can put a little asterisk next to it because they dominated play. I think they are realistically the informed team at the moment, overtaking Tasmania, whose 8-game winning streak has now been ended.
Well, we talk about it and we look forward to what could be a play-in tournament, what could be a semi-final series and then championship series. So I'll ask you this, Ruck, we'll put it this way. The way that Southeast Melbourne have been playing, is there any team in particular that's going to cause them a bigger issue than the rest in a 3-game semi-final series? Because what we've seen lately, they're more than capable of potentially even sweeping a semi-final series against most teams.
Well, I think the team that should be wary of Southeast Melbourne is Melbourne United, because they've kind of had their number this year. And I think the way Southeast Melbourne are constructed, they have enough offensive talents to overcome the really strong, well, what used to be strong defensive team of Melbourne United. Pete, we're going to have to address that at some point too, because I don't know what's going on with Melbourne United's defense. But let's get back to the Phoenix. So you start looking at teams that they don't match up well against. I don't like their chances in Perth. I'm not sure how they would fare in a 3-game series against Sydney if Sydney had home court advantage. I do like their matchup against Illawarra. So again, the theme that you started off with, the parity of the league, is kind of encapsulated in Southeast Melbourne's matchups and how they would fare against certain teams in the competition in a 3-game playoff series.
Well, let's get into it then. You said you want to talk about it, Melbourne United. They've lost 5 of their last 6. Their sole win came against Cairns, and that game on Boxing Day, it was far from convincing. They just put up 70-plus points. But defensively, as you mentioned, I mean, against Adelaide, Kendrick Davis did his thing. He's been exceptional. We saw Montrezl Harrell, Isaac Humphries, Vasiljevic. They seem to score at will. It also sees that on the other side, offensively, they're struggling at both ends right now.
It's like when you have a really, really great car and you're driving that car's been so good to you, and then you notice, oh, that felt different when I turned that corner. Is that something I need to have looked at, or is it just something that happened? This is the way Melbourne United feel for me right now. I know they're going to come through this. My heart, my brain, my basketball soul tells me they're going to be all right. But Pete, you know what's not all right? Losing 5 out of 6 and your defense looking absolutely resistant free. They can't stop anybody. And throw that Cairns game out. I'm not counting that Cairns game, a matter of fact. They've lost 5 in a row, in my opinion.
Wow.
All right? So where does the change occur? Chris Golding has been back in the lineup long enough now that you thought that everybody would have gelled properly. But maybe this road trip isn't going to be the blessing that we all thought it was, where they could come together, rally around one another, and everyone in that organization. And I'm not sure there's a better coach in the competition than Dean Vickerman, who's done more, who's won more, who's seen more. And right now, they have a big one Thursday night in Sydney. They have a massive game Thursday night in Sydney, and I expect we see the full steam of Melbourne United on display in that one.
Well, it's battle for second spot now because of the slide that Melbourne United has been on. Before we move on, because I want to chat the Sydney Kings, we know Chris Golding continues to put up his numbers. He's playing exceptionally well this season. But outside of him on the offensive end, who is it for Melbourne? Give me one guy. Is it Matthew Dellavedova? He's been up and down, scoring the balls. Assists have been fantastic. Is it Jack White, who's been in a form slump? Is it Rob Lowe, who was putting up numbers for a while there? Ian Clark, we haven't seen a lot of. Which one is it who has to step up in particular?
Well, Pete, I think it's 2 guys. It's Jack White, and, you know, the numbers were looking good before the FIBA break. Since then, they've kind of tailed off a bit. We know he had the injury that really kind of disrupted his flow, but he's got to pick it up now. He's got to look for ways to impact on the offensive end more. And I'm talking about not necessarily out of the system, not second chance and effort points. I'm talking about when he battles against his man and making plays either for himself or his teammates. He sometimes gets too caught up in the system. He's got to develop that next level of his play in game. And the other one is Ian Clark. Ian Clark, we know the class that this man can play at. And for some reason, maybe with the guards being injured and again, your continuity gets disrupted through the season. But I would anticipate Ian Clark knows that the moment is coming where he has to really influence games. And he's the guy for them right now in the backcourt. Chris has been pretty steady. Delly, as you said, Delly's playing great point guard, floor management basketball, but they need a punch in the backcourt, an extra punch, and I think that has to be Ian Clark.
Well, they're going to get the chance to do it, as you said, on Thursday against the Sydney Kings. Battle for second spot, and we talk about the Sydney Kings. With all the ups and downs, with all the questions everybody's had about their roster, they've announced a new signing, which we'll talk about. But they're the best fourth quarter team in the competition. And a lot of that has to do with Jalen Adams. Do you have a little bit more trust in what Sydney can do in the business end of the season? Because they've shown when the game's on the line, they're going to step up.
Pete, the West Coast has Bryce Cotton. The East Coast has Kendrick Davis. We've got 3 guys operating at super high levels in the NBL right now. Now, Jalen Adams' fourth quarter exploits have been unbelievable. But, Pete, I'm giving more credit to the defense and what Brian Gorgian has been able to do in making adjustments either at halftime or at three-quarter time, where that team comes out, cranks that defense up to a level to the point where they are clearly the best defensive team in the competition when they can perform at that fourth quarter level we see them go to. They held Brisbane to 8 several rounds ago. They held Southeast Melbourne to 16 in the fourth quarter. And these are very good offensive teams. So Brian Gorgian has come under a bit of scrutiny this year for various reasons, for the Cam Oliver stuff, for his very informative press conferences. But let's give him some credit. The guru is still finding ways to limit teams the way he wants to, which is via his defensive schemes. And for that reason, you can't count Sydney out, despite their offensive struggles. But it looks like they've decided in the fourth quarter, Cooks and Adams. Let's see if it works. The other thing, Pete, and my final note on the Kings, it was good to see them find a way to utilize Cam Oliver in the fourth quarter the other night. You know for yourself, that 2018 title, sometimes it comes down to, in the fourth quarter, just getting the ball to somebody and getting a bucket. And Cam Oliver had 2 huge buckets in that game against Brisbane the other night, the biggest being that little short turnaround jumper he got in the paint. So perhaps everything is starting to come together for the Kings, and they can save me that dreadful walk from Brisbane to Perth.
I didn't want to bring that up, right, because I was starting to get a little nervous for you. But again, as you said, the positive side of it is that through all the ups and downs, through all the questions that everybody has, they have a chance to be second in the next round. So they're right there, and if they play their best basketball, it's more than good enough. The opposite of clutch maybe in the fourth quarter, the Brisbane Bullets. You mentioned it. They struggled to score a few weeks ago. They have had their issues in the fourth quarter. What do you put it down to? Is it a personnel thing? Is it a game style? Is it a substitution? Because that's where games can be won and lost, and for them, they're losing big games in fourth quarter moments.
Well, throughout the course of this season, Casey Prather has kind of been the guy that has given them consistent scoring rights. James Bateman was the one that was hitting big buckets down the stretch. And losing Bateman, I think, took away their key clutch point maker and also playmaker. So I don't think they've really found out a way to get around that yet. Keandre Cook, I would love for him to step up and just be more aggressive, more assertive, take the risk, not shy away from the moment. Not that he's scared or anything like that, but I think sometimes he looks to stay within the system too much. Put the ball on the deck. You can do more off the bounce than I think you've shown. But now going forward, how do they improve their fourth quarter fortunes? Well, again, like I mentioned with the Sydney Kings, it's got to start on the defensive end. And defense is really not a strong suit of this Brisbane Bullets team. I think they're 8th in the competition now defensively, but they've got to figure out a way to resist teams, create turnovers, defensive rebound, and get out on the break and try and get some easy buckets in transition, and that will help their fourth quarter fortunes.
Well, hopefully something else that helps is their new signing, Josh Adams, who all NBL fans, especially Jack Jumper fans, are familiar with. Landed off the plane, had a night's sleep, thrown straight into the starting lineup. Now, we don't normally see that. We saw that he was suiting up, potentially was not going to play. That's what we normally get the sense of. But they threw him in there. He knocked down a 3. He's very important to what they can achieve.
Yeah, I liked what Josh Adams did. He came in there, he brought them energy. He was aggressive. I thought his body language was really good. He was mingling with his teammates well, and that is only going to improve over the balance of the season. Now, they have New Zealand coming into town, and realistically, Pete, you'd think they would wear New Zealand down. New Zealand won't have a significant taco advantage because Brisbane does have Tyrell Harrison. Tyrell Harrison is more than capable of limiting Taco Fall's impact on the game. But I just worry about whether New Zealand have enough around the court to go with Brisbane. And Josh Adams, this is a game where he can kind of really make his mark and show his teammates and the league that he is still a high-quality import. Because, Pete, let's be real. I'm sure there are other teams with their eye on Josh Adams to see if he is a possible quality potential signing for next season.
It's a good point, Ruck. We saw it with Brisbane Bullets last year, kind of giving a trial to Casey Prather essentially, and then we're seeing what he's doing this season. Before I let you go, there's nearly games throughout the entire month of January. Another game tomorrow, Tasmania Hawks try to get back on the winners list. The Hawks in particular. We saw the capitulation at the end against the Cairns Taipans, compounding errors, but they've lost a couple of games now. Are you concerned? Are there any worries there for the Hawks, or are these losses coming at the right time as sort of reality checks for we all still believe is the best team in the competition?
Yeah, it's moderately complex because you hate losing games over the festive season at home, especially to the last place team, and you look sloppy, you're a little bit flat, the energy wasn't right. So they can correct their course really quickly with a strong win over Tasmania. The only problem is Tasmania are probably angered because they didn't want to lose a home game and they were kind of humiliated on their home floor. So I don't think overall Illawarra need to be overly concerned. They had built a nice buffer between themselves and the rest of the competition. So these two losses haven't been the end of the world for them. But certainly if they were to drop a third, it just starts to eat away at the team belief in itself. And I think that's where things start getting dangerous for Justin Tatum and his crew. But I think Illawarra will handle Tasmania and kind of get themselves back on the winning track.
It's going to be interesting. It all kicks off tomorrow night on Tuesday. Plenty to happen in January. It's a perfect time to be involved in the NBL from a playing point of view, from a commentator, from a fan, because there are so many games which mean players aren't practicing. They're on the floor competing, and we get to break it all down for you. Ruck, appreciate it as always.
Pete, love your work.
Thank you everybody for watching. This has been Moments That Mattered. As I said, there's games nearly every day in January, so we'll see you there.